In the farthest reaches of the cosmos, where stars burned with an otherworldly brilliance and nebulae painted the void with colors no human eye could truly comprehend, there existed a realm known as Zyia. It was a kingdom not of earth or stone but of crystalline spires that shimmered like frozen rainbows under twin suns. The air itself seemed alive, humming softly with energy that pulsed through every living being within its borders. This was the home of Princess Lyra, heir to the throne of the Zyrian Empire, whose people were beings of light and grace, ethereal creatures who communicated through melodic tones and gestures so fluid they appeared as if dancing on invisible currents. Princess Lyra had grown up surrounded by beauty and harmony, her days filled with lessons in diplomacy, artistry, and the ancient traditions of her people. Her skin glowed faintly with an opalescent sheen, shifting hues depending on her emotions, while her hair flowed like liquid silver down her back. She was revered not only for her lineage but also for her gentle spirit, which radiated kindness even to those who served her. Yet beneath this serene exterior lay a heart burdened by duty. As the sole heir, she bore the weight of her people's expectations, knowing that one day she would ascend to rule over their fragile peace, a responsibility she both cherished and feared. Her world, though breathtaking, was not without its shadows. Beyond the protective barriers of Zyria's atmosphere loomed threats from neighboring realms, some hostile, others merely opportunistic. Among these was Earth, a planet viewed by many Zyrians as chaotic and dangerous, ruled by humans whose lives were fleeting yet marked by relentless ambition. To them, humanity represented unpredictability, a species capable of great creation and equally devastating destruction. And it was into this precarious balance between worlds that fate thrust Lyra when news arrived of an impending alliance, a marriage contract forged by her father, King Solon, in hopes of securing lasting peace. The warrior chosen for her hand was none other than Commander Kale Draven, a name whispered with equal parts awe and dread across the galaxy. A human general renowned for his tactical brilliance and unyielding resolve, he had risen from humble beginnings to become one of Earth's most formidable leaders. His reputation preceded him, battles won against overwhelming odds, enemies vanquished without mercy, and entire star systems brought to heel under his command. Tales spoke of his piercing gaze, said to cut through deception as easily as his blade did flesh, and of his voice, deep and commanding, capable of inspiring loyalty or striking terror into the hearts of his foes. To Lyra, however, Kale was more than just a conqueror. He was a symbol of everything she had been taught to fear about humanity. While her people valued cooperation and empathy, Kale embodied dominance and control. Stories of his ruthlessness reached Zyria long before the official announcement of their engagement, painting him as a man who achieved victory at any cost, regardless of collateral damage. For Lyra, who had spent her life cultivating compassion and understanding, the prospect of binding herself to such a figure felt akin to stepping into a storm with no shelter in sight. When the royal emissary delivered the sealed scroll containing the terms of the alliance, Lyra's luminous form dimmed visibly, her usual glow fading to a pale flicker. She retreated to her private chambers, where she sat amidst cascading streams of light filtering through crystalline walls, trying to steady her trembling hands. The thought of leaving Zyria, to leave behind the familiar embrace of her culture, her family, and the sanctuary of her home, was daunting enough. But to wed someone like Kale? Someone whose very existence seemed antithetical to everything she stood for? It was unimaginable. Yet, despite her fears, Lyra understood the stakes. If she refused, war might erupt between their peoples, shattering the fragile truce her father had worked tirelessly to maintain. Her personal happiness paled in comparison to the potential devastation that could follow. Still, as she gazed out at the shimmering horizon of her beloved homeland, tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of sheer terror. How could she possibly coexist with a man whose soul seemed forged in fire and steel? Kale Draven stood aboard the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Resolve, staring out at the swirling expanse of hyperspace as the vessel hurtled towards Zyria. The mission ahead weighed heavily on his mind, though his stoic expression betrayed none of it. He had spent decades honing his skills, rising through the ranks of Earth's military forces until he became the architect of victories that reshaped entire regions of space. Yet, for all his triumphs, this assignment was unlike anything he had faced before. Marriage to an alien princess, a being whose very nature defied his understanding, was not something he had ever anticipated. To Kale, alliances were tools, means to an end. Emotions rarely factored into his decisions. They clouded judgment and weakened resolve. Love, in particular, was a concept he dismissed as impractical, a luxury reserved for poets and dreamers. His upbringing on Earth's harshest frontiers had taught him survival depended on strength and strategy, not sentimentality. And yet here he was, bound by treaty to wed a woman whose existence challenged everything he knew about power, leadership, and even humanity itself. As the ship approached Zyria, Kale reviewed the intelligence reports compiled by his advisors. They described Princess Lyra as ethereal, almost otherworldly in her beauty and demeanor. Words like grace and compassion dominated the descriptions, qualities Kale found difficult to reconcile with the demands of ruling a fractured galaxy. To him, rulership required decisiveness, authority, and the willingness to make sacrifices, qualities he associated more with himself than with the delicate figure depicted in holographic projections. His thoughts turned to the political implications of the union. Earth's leaders saw this marriage as a way to secure resources and expand influence, leveraging Zyrithya's advanced technology and strategic position. For Kale, it was another battlefield, albeit one fought with words and gestures rather than weapons. He resolved to approach the situation with the same precision and discipline he applied to warfare. Diplomacy, after all, was simply another form of combat, requiring careful planning and calculated moves. Still, doubts lingered at the edges of his consciousness. Could he truly coexist with someone so fundamentally different? Would Lyra see him as a brute, a monster unworthy of her affection? These questions gnawed at him, though he pushed them aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them head-on, as he always did. But deep down, a part of him wondered if this mission might test him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The grand hall of the Zyrithian palace shimmered with an ethereal glow as sunlight refracted through crystalline walls, casting prismatic patterns across the floor. Servants moved silently, their forms nearly translucent as they prepared for the arrival of Commander Kale Draven. Princess Lyra stood at the center of the chamber, her silver hair flowing gently as though stirred by an unseen breeze. Around her, advisors whispered urgently, their melodic voices blending into a symphony of concern. "Your Highness," one elder began, his tone laced with both reverence and worry, "you must remember that this alliance is vital. The commander may appear formidable, but we trust you to guide him toward harmony." Lyra nodded faintly, though her luminous skin betrayed her unease, flickering with muted shades of violet and blue. She clenched her hands tightly, willing herself to remain composed. Nearby, her younger brother, Prince Selim, stepped forward, his youthful energy a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "Sister," he said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, "you are stronger than you think. Remember who you are. You carry the light of our people within you." Before Lyra could respond, the doors to the hall slid open with a soft chime, and all movement ceased. Kale entered, his towering frame clad in polished armor that gleamed menacingly under the radiant light. His boots echoed sharply against the smooth floor, each step deliberate and measured. Behind him trailed a small contingent of human soldiers, their expressions stern and unyielding. The contrast between them and the graceful Zyrithians was jarring, like storm clouds intruding upon a tranquil sky. Kale's gaze swept the room, taking in every detail with clinical precision. When his eyes finally landed on Lyra, there was a brief pause, a flicker of something unreadable in his otherwise impassive features. He inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement, a gesture stiff and formal. Lyra mirrored the motion, though her movements were fluid, almost hesitant. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, a palpable divide that neither seemed eager to bridge. King Solon descended from his throne, his presence commanding yet gentle. "Commander Draven," he intoned, his voice resonating like a low hum, "welcome to Zyrithia. We are honored by your presence and hopeful for the peace this union will bring." Kale bowed deeply, his posture rigid but respectful. "Your Majesty," he replied, his voice gravelly and firm, "I come in good faith, ready to fulfill my obligations to ensure stability for both our peoples." The exchange set the tone for what followed, a series of ceremonies steeped in tradition, each moment heavy with symbolism. As Lyra and Kale were led side by side through rituals meant to bind them together, their interactions remained guarded. Lyra's attempts at polite conversation were met with curt responses, while Kale's direct inquiries about Zyrithian customs elicited cautious answers. Despite their efforts, the cultural chasm between them loomed large, underscored by subtle missteps and lingering discomfort. During a ceremonial dance, Lyra extended her hand to Kale, inviting him to join her. He hesitated, clearly unfamiliar with the intricate steps, but eventually complied, moving with surprising agility given his imposing stature. Though their movements lacked the seamless synchrony typical of Zyrithian dancers, the effort drew murmurs of approval from the gathered crowd. Yet, when their eyes met briefly, Lyra saw no warmth in Kale's gaze, only determination, as though he viewed this act as another tactical maneuver in a larger campaign. As the evening wore on, whispers circulated among the Zyrithians. Some admired Kale's discipline and focus, seeing potential for growth beneath his hardened exterior. Others harbored reservations, fearing his methods might clash irreparably with their values. Meanwhile, Kale's own retinue exchanged wary glances, noting how out of place their commander seemed amidst such opulence and fragility. By the time the festivities drew to a close, exhaustion etched itself onto Lyra's face. She retired to her chambers, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Across the palace, Kale paced restlessly, his thoughts consumed by calculations and contingencies. Neither slept soundly that night, each grappling with the enormity of what lay ahead, and the undeniable truth that their paths were now irrevocably intertwined. Days passed in a blur of diplomatic meetings and cultural exchanges, each encounter between Lyra and Kale layered with unspoken tension. During one such session, held in a secluded garden bathed in the golden light of Zyrithia's twin suns, Lyra attempted to engage Kale in conversation about the flora surrounding them. These blossoms, she explained, her voice soft and melodic, are believed to embody the essence of unity. They thrive only when nurtured by mutual care. Kale glanced at the flowers briefly before returning his gaze to her. Unity is often fragile, he remarked, his tone devoid of emotion. It requires strength to protect it. Lyra faltered, taken aback by his response. But isn't strength sometimes found in gentleness? She countered, her luminous skin shifting to a faint green hue, signaling her growing frustration. Kale's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Gentleness has its place, he conceded, but it cannot stand alone against chaos. Their discussions frequently veered into philosophical debates, each defending their worldview with quiet intensity. One evening, during a shared meal in the palace dining hall, Lyra questioned Kale's reliance on force. Surely there are ways to achieve peace without resorting to violence, she suggested, her silver eyes searching his face for understanding. Kale leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. Peace achieved through weakness is no peace at all, he replied evenly. Sometimes, fear is the only language certain adversaries understand. Despite their ideological clashes, moments of unexpected connection began to surface. On a guided tour of Zyrithia's archives, Lyra paused before a holographic display depicting ancient battles fought by her ancestors. Even we have known conflict, she admitted softly. But we learned that true victory lies not in domination, but in reconciliation. Kale observed her closely, noting the sincerity in her expression. Reconciliation can be a form of strength, he acknowledged after a pause, surprising both himself and Lyra with the admission. Such instances, though rare, hinted at a deeper complexity beneath Kale's hardened exterior. In quieter moments, away from the scrutiny of courtiers and advisors, Lyra caught glimpses of vulnerability in him, subtle shifts in his demeanor that suggested he too grappled with doubts and uncertainties. Once, while walking along a moonlit terrace, she noticed him gazing pensively at the stars. "Do you miss your home?" she asked tentatively, breaking the silence. Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Home is wherever duty calls," he replied, his voice softer than usual. Lyra hesitated, then ventured further. "And what does duty demand of you now?" For a long moment, Kale did not answer. When he finally spoke, his words carried a weight that startled her. "To find a way forward," he said quietly, "even when the path is unclear." These fleeting exchanges planted seeds of curiosity in Lyra's heart. Beneath the armor of ruthlessness, she sensed a man shaped by experiences vastly different from her own, a man who perhaps yearned for something more than conquest. Yet, bridging the gap between them remained a daunting challenge, fraught with misunderstandings and deeply ingrained beliefs. One afternoon, during a ceremonial procession through the city, Kale's instincts took over when a sudden commotion erupted among the crowd. Without hesitation, he stepped protectively in front of Lyra, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side. The gesture, though intended to safeguard her, startled the Zyrithians, who recoiled at the display of aggression. Lyra placed a calming hand on Kale's arm, her touch surprisingly steady despite her racing pulse. "There is no threat here," she assured him, her voice steady. "Only celebration." Kale lowered his guard reluctantly, his sharp gaze scanning the area once more before meeting hers. "Better safe than sorry," he muttered under his breath. Though the incident passed quickly, it underscored the vast differences in their approaches to security and trust. For Lyra, safety stemmed from collective harmony. For Kale, it was rooted in vigilance and readiness for conflict. Such disparities continued to color their interactions, creating a delicate dance of compromise and adaptation as they navigated the complexities of their arranged union. As weeks turned into months, the initial frostiness between Lyra and Kale began to thaw, revealing layers of complexity that neither had anticipated. Their daily routines intertwined in ways that forced them to confront their preconceptions. Mornings often started with joint meditation sessions in the palace gardens, a practice introduced by Lyra as a means of fostering inner peace. At first, Kale struggled to sit still, his restless energy betraying years of constant motion. Yet, over time, he found solace in the rhythmic breathing exercises, his rigid posture gradually softening as he allowed himself to be present in the moment. During these quiet interludes, Lyra noticed subtle changes in Kale's demeanor. His usual scowl would ease, replaced by a contemplative expression that hinted at introspection. Encouraged by these glimpses of vulnerability, she ventured to share stories of her childhood, tales of playful escapades among the crystalline spires and lessons learned from her wise mentors. To her surprise, Kale listened intently, occasionally offering anecdotes from his own past. He spoke of harsh winters on Earth's frontier colonies, where survival depended on resourcefulness and resilience. These narratives painted a picture of a man shaped by hardship, yet driven by an unyielding sense of purpose. Their shared meals became opportunities for deeper dialogue. One evening, as they dined beneath a canopy of glowing lanterns, Lyra broached a subject that had long intrigued her. "You speak often of duty," she began, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Does it ever feel burdensome?" Kale paused, fork halfway to his mouth, before setting it down deliberately. "Burden is relative," he replied, his tone measured. "What weighs me down might seem insignificant to you, and vice versa." Lyra tilted her head, considering his words. "Perhaps," she mused, "but I wonder if carrying such weight alone leaves room for joy." The question hung in the air, unanswered, yet it lingered in Kale's thoughts long after the meal ended. That night, as he walked the palace corridors, he found himself reflecting on her words. Joy, a concept he had rarely considered in his pursuit of order and control. Was it possible to reconcile his responsibilities with the kind of fulfillment Lyra seemed to embody? Their bond deepened further during a diplomatic crisis that tested both their resolve and adaptability. News arrived of skirmishes near Zyrithia's borders, instigated by factions opposed to the alliance. Tensions ran high as advisors clamored for decisive action. Lyra advocated for peaceful negotiations, urging restraint and dialogue. Kale, however, argued for a show of force to deter further aggression. The disagreement escalated into a heated exchange in the war room, where maps and holographic projections illuminated the table between them. "Your compassion blinds you to reality," Kale snapped, slamming his fist onto the surface. "And your aggression risks plunging us into chaos." Lyra shot back, her usually serene voice edged with steel. For a moment, they stared at each other, the air thick with unresolved tension. Then, unexpectedly, Kale exhaled sharply and stepped back. "Fine," he conceded gruffly. "Let's hear your plan." Lyra blinked, momentarily stunned by his concession. Gathering her composure, she outlined a strategy that combined elements of both their approaches, diplomatic outreach supported by a visible military presence. Together, they presented the proposal to King Solon, who approved it with cautious optimism. The resolution of the crisis marked a turning point in their relationship. Working side by side, they discovered complementary strengths that balanced their contrasting styles. Lyra's empathy opened channels of communication previously closed to Kale, while his strategic acumen provided structure and clarity to her idealistic visions. Slowly but surely, a fragile trust began to form, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to their intertwined destinies. Yet, even as their connection grew, shadows of doubt lingered. Late one night, as they strolled through the palace observatory, gazing at the stars, Lyra voiced a lingering fear. "Do you think we can truly bridge this divide between us?" she asked softly, her luminous form casting a gentle glow around them. Kale turned to her, his expression inscrutable. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice unusually vulnerable. "But I'm willing to try, if you are." Lyra smiled faintly, her heart buoyed by his honesty. "Then let's take it one step at a time," she said, reaching out to clasp his hand. For the first time, Kale did not pull away. Instead, he held her gaze, a flicker of something akin to hope sparking in his eyes. The days that followed were a delicate dance of progress and setbacks, each moment testing the fragile bond Lyra and Kale had begun to forge. Their willingness to try, however tentative, opened doors neither had anticipated. Yet, the path ahead remained fraught with challenges, as their differences continued to surface in unexpected ways. One morning, Lyra invited Kale to join her in a traditional Zyrithian ceremony known as the Harmonization ritual. It was an ancient practice meant to align the energies of two individuals, fostering deeper understanding and unity. The ritual took place in a secluded chamber deep within the palace, its walls adorned with intricate carvings that pulsed faintly with light. Lyra explained the process gently, her voice lilting like a melody. "We must focus on our shared intentions," she said, placing her hands palm up on a glowing crystal pedestal. "Let go of resistance and allow the flow of energy to guide us." Kale hesitated, his brow furrowed as he studied the setup. "This seems abstract," he remarked, his tone laced with skepticism. "How does it achieve tangible results?" Lyra's lips curved into a patient smile. "Not everything requires immediate proof, Commander. Sometimes, faith is enough." Reluctantly, Kale placed his hands beside hers, his calloused palms contrasting sharply with her smooth, luminous skin. As the ritual began, soft chimes resonated through the chamber, and a warm hum enveloped them. At first, Kale felt nothing but unease, his mind racing with questions about the efficacy of such practices. But then, gradually, he became aware of a subtle shift, a sensation akin to standing at the edge of a calm lake, feeling the ripples of another's presence without seeing them directly. For Lyra, the experience was profound. She sensed Kale's guardedness, the layers of armor he wore not just physically but emotionally. Yet beneath that, she glimpsed flashes of longing, for connection, for purpose beyond duty. When the ritual concluded, they withdrew their hands, both visibly affected though neither spoke immediately. "What did you feel?" Lyra asked finally, her silver eyes searching his face. Kale exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. "A disturbance," he admitted gruffly. "But also, clarity. Perhaps there is merit in your methods after all." Though his words lacked warmth, they carried a weight of sincerity that touched Lyra deeply. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that change was possible. Not just in him, but in their relationship as well. Despite these moments of breakthrough, external pressures mounted. News of unrest among Earth's factions reached Zyrithia, fueling dissent against the Alliance. Rumors spread of rogue human commanders plotting to undermine Kale's authority, viewing his marriage to an alien princess as a betrayal of humanity's interests. Meanwhile, whispers of rebellion stirred within Zyrithia itself, with some nobles questioning whether the Union compromised their sovereignty. Amidst this turmoil, Kale received a coded transmission from Earth's High Command. He excused himself from a council meeting to review the message in private, his jaw tightening as he absorbed its contents. When Lyra found him later in the war room, poring over holographic maps, his demeanor was grim. "Trouble?" she inquired softly, approaching cautiously. Kale looked up, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "Complications," he corrected. "There are factions moving against us, both here and back home. They see weakness in our alliance." Lyra frowned, concern etched across her features. "And what will you do?" "I'll neutralize the threat," he replied firmly, his voice edged with determination. "But I need your help." Her surprise was evident. "My help?" Kale nodded, leaning forward slightly. "Your insight into diplomacy could be invaluable. If we act swiftly and decisively, we might prevent escalation. Together, They devised a plan that combined Lyra's diplomatic finesse with Kale's strategic expertise. They dispatched envoys to key systems, offering assurances while subtly reinforcing the strength of their partnership. Simultaneously, Kale deployed reconnaissance units to monitor potential threats, ensuring they stayed one step ahead of any hostile movements. As they worked side by side, their collaboration grew more seamless. Lyra marveled at Kale's ability to anticipate obstacles, while Kale found himself impressed by her knack for diffusing tension with grace. Yet, even as their professional synergy strengthened, personal barriers remained. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of negotiations, they retired to a balcony overlooking the city. The twin suns had dipped below the horizon, bathing the skyline in hues of lavender and gold. Lyra leaned against the railing, her gaze distant as she processed the day's events. "You're quiet," Kale observed, joining her at the railing. She glanced at him, offering a small smile. "Just thinking about how much has changed, and how much still needs to." Kale followed her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "Change is rarely easy, especially when it challenges who we are." Lyra turned to face him fully, her luminous form casting a gentle glow. "Do you ever wonder if we're asking too much of each other? To adapt so completely, to become something new?" He met her eyes, his own reflecting a rare vulnerability. "Every day," he admitted quietly. "But I also wonder if we're capable of more than we realize. Together." The honesty in his words caught her off guard, stirring emotions she had long kept guarded. For a fleeting moment, she imagined what it might be like to truly trust him, not just as a partner in duty, but as someone who understood her deepest fears and aspirations. Before she could respond, a sudden alarm blared through the palace, shattering the tranquility. Both sprang into action, rushing toward the source of the disturbance. In the central courtyard, chaos reigned as intruders clad in dark armor breached the perimeter. Energy blasts lit up the night sky, sending shards of crystalline debris raining down. Kale drew his weapon instinctively, positioning himself protectively in front of Lyra. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. But Lyra refused to cower. Summoning her innate abilities, she extended her arms, creating a shimmering barrier of light that deflected incoming attacks. "I'm not helpless," she shot back, her tone firm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Side by side, they fought their way through the melee, their movements synchronized as though guided by an unseen force. Kale's combat prowess complemented Lyra's defensive capabilities, turning the tide of the battle in their favor. By the time reinforcements arrived, the intruders had been subdued. Breathing heavily, Lyra lowered her arms, the glow fading from her skin. Kale holstered his weapon, turning to assess her condition. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his concern palpable. She shook her head, meeting his gaze with newfound resolve. "No. And neither are you." In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of mutual strength and reliance that transcended their differences. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, they stood united, ready to face whatever challenges lay in wait. As the dust settled, Kale placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder, his touch firmer yet gentler than before. "You were extraordinary," he said, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic softness. Lyra smiled faintly, her luminous skin glowing with quiet pride. "So were you. Perhaps we're not so different after all." In the days that followed, their bond deepened further. They no longer saw each other as alien or adversary but as partners navigating a shared destiny. Though challenges persisted, political intrigues, cultural divides, and lingering doubts, they faced them together, drawing strength from their unity. One evening, beneath the twin suns of Zyia, Kale broke his usual stoicism. "I never imagined I'd find purpose beyond duty," he confessed. "But you've shown me there's more to life than survival." Tears welled in Lyra's eyes as she took his hand. "And you've taught me that strength isn't always gentle, but it can still protect what matters." Their marriage, once feared and uncertain, became a symbol of hope for both their peoples. It was imperfect, evolving, and marked by compromise, but it was real. Together, they forged a new path, proving that even the most unlikely alliances could blossom into something profound. As they stood side by side, gazing at the stars, they knew their journey was far from over. But for the first time, they faced it not with fear, but with faith, in themselves, in each other, and in the future they would build together.